On Test of Faith, could religion survive the discovery of aliens?
Test of Faith with Valerie Pringle.
Ever get the feeling you're all alone in the universe, that there's nobody out there except you and a few billion other Earthlings? Or are you a member of a more select group, perhaps more sociable, one of the tens of thousands of people who each year believe that they have been approached by aliens? It's very easy to joke about close encounters of the third kind, but modern science and some religions take this subject very seriously. The discovery of alternate life forms from another planet would be more than just another chapter in the great book of life. Some people believe it would cause us to completely rethink and rewrite the entire thing. If God made humans in his own image, then who created the aliens? What if the aliens are superior beings? What does that say about our place in God's hierarchy? And perhaps the most difficult question of all, could religion survive the discovery of aliens? Robert Sawyer is a renowned science fiction writer. He's written a number of books dealing with faith and aliens, such as Calculating God. He joins me now. Hello.
Hi, Valerie.
What do you think would happen to religion if we discovered life?
It's going to be extremely hard for any of our organized religions that have preached a particular dogma to survive beings who clearly, by definition, must be more intelligent than we are if they come here. We don't have the technology to go anywhere else in the universe. We can't even go to the moon anymore. We haven't done that for 30 years. If somebody shows up here, by definition, they're more advanced technologically and scientifically than we are. And it's going to be very hard for us to look at these clearly intellectually superior beings who almost certainly aren't going to share our version of creation mythology, our version of religious ethics, or our very specific biblical or Quranic or whatever Talmudic stories that you might draw upon.
Couldn't we just include them? Oh, we meant that too.
Well, there's been a whole bunch of that game playing going on in the last, say, 150 years since Darwin published The Origin of Species, where, there are lots of good, solid Christian theologians who have made peace with evolutionary theory. But nonetheless, there's a basic fundamental truth behind every religion which says that there is a specific God who has a specific nature as described in these specific texts that does exist. We don't even agree amongst ourselves. The 6 billion of us schlepping around on this planet can't come to a consensus about what constitutes God. The chance of an alien showing up and saying, or us receiving a message from the stars saying Jesus is the true Savior, or that Allah is good, is extremely small. We're either going to hear, well, isn't that quaint that you have religious belief? Or, no, actually, we've been all over this big wide universe. You guys are just sitting on this little planet, and here's what we've found out, and it doesn't jive with what you think. I don't think organized religion, and I underscore that word organized, is going to survive an encounter with extraterrestrial life.
When you say survive, I mean, could it mutate, change, rewrite, or would it have to go oops?
Well, the oops factor is something we've seen over and over again in religions that are cults in particular that predict that the world will end on such and such a day, and then it doesn't. And so they have to retrench and say, oops, we made this calculation wrong and that calculation wrong. And credibility does fade after a period of time. It is going to be extremely difficult, certainly for fundamentalists, to make peace with the fact that, if an alien has traveled more than 6,000 light years to get here, it means the universe must be more than 6,000 years old, because Einstein told us we couldn't travel faster than the speed of light. And fundamentalist Christians believe that the universe is 6,000 years old. Well, if somebody shows up and says, no, it isn't, that's going to be very hard to incorporate. Once you've taken the strong line position, the fundamentalist strong line position, it's very hard to incorporate scientific reality into it, which is, of course, what we're seeing happen all over the world these days.
What do you think would happen then? Would we still need religion, or?
Well, it's funny, this idea that we do need religion. There does seem to be something very much ingrained in us that wants to look outward for moral guidance, and also really, really, really wants somebody to tell us that this isn't all there is, that the biblical 70 isn't all you get, that there is an immortality, an afterlife, which we have an enormous, the vast majority of the 6 billion of us do believe in an afterlife in defiance of evidence for the existence of an afterlife. It very much is a psychological need for us to believe there's more to it than what we see. It would be fascinating if aliens showed up and said, you know, we've looked, we've checked, we've done all the studies, and there is no afterlife. This is all you get. That would probably have a very positive effect on human psychology. It would be a lot harder to send your young boys off to war and die if you didn't think they were going to be rewarded for it in heaven. It'd be a lot harder for Osama bin Laden to send people to cave in the sides of the World Trade Center in airplanes if those pilots didn't think they were going to be rewarded in heaven.
We've got a 5-star panel here.
Excellent.
Waiting to take you on.
I'm in the hot seat, I know that.
We'll get to them right after this on Test of Faith. Got a great panel here. Krista Henriksen is an anthropologist, did some interesting work for her master's thesis at Simon Fraser with people who'd had close encounters. What did you find?
I actually studied people's stories of their close encounters with extraterrestrials, and I found a number of things, but one of the most interesting things is I found that most often extraterrestrials seem to bring messages that are by and large positive, even though people's experiences are often highly traumatic and very distressing at first when they report them. Extraterrestrials seem to tell them that they're not alone in the universe, which makes sense if there are extraterrestrials.
Telling you this.
Yes, right. That they have a purpose in life, and often it's combined with visions of a destructed Earth and a sense that they have a mission to do something about it. And people seem to actually change their lives because of these experiences.
Graham Nicholson teaches philosophy of religion at the University of Toronto. How do religions change? You know, we talked about when evolutionary theory came in. When new discoveries come, what happens to traditional religious dogma?
Well, religion is always in the process of change. And the biggest change of all in the West, I think, was the Copernicus and Galileo story, where we overcame...
That was recently.
Well, that's... in terms of world history, it's very recent, only 400 years or so. But we learned that the cosmological picture of all the ancient texts couldn't be sustained. It's not only the Bible, it has heaven and earth and hell are underneath. That's true of the Greek and the Indian and all cosmologies of the pre-scientific age. So religion in the West has, I think, for the most part, made its peace with Galileo and Copernicus, meaning to say that we no longer think of the Bible as a text on the cosmology or the origin of the world, but rather speaking to us in a different way spiritually.
That, except unless, I guess, if you're a fundamentalist.
Yes, there are, religion never changes completely, and there are people who still hang on to the old-time religion. That's absolutely true. And that's true not just in the Christianity, but in other biblical religions, and in fact, I think in all religions. So conflict and variety is what you see in the history of religion, for sure.
Father Chris Corbally, I'd like to introduce now, who's the Vatican astronomer. Might surprise some people, such a job exists.
Yes, and it's been going since before the time of Galileo, so a little bit before anyway.
Well, describe what you do.
Well, initially it started because the calendar was getting out of whack with the seasons, and so Easter was creeping into a winter feast, and that wouldn't do with a feast that should express new life, new birth, whatever. So that's when the Church reformed the calendar, was advised how to reform it, and Pope Gregory did that. I suppose what we do now as the observatory kind of is, again, good science. A real involvement, a concrete involvement with science. And part of the reason is that misunderstandings, let's say, such as Galileo and Copernicus, should not happen again.
Do you believe that we've already been visited by beings from other planets?
I rather join Carl Sagan with this, and some people might be quite amused, saying that extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence. And as yet, I don't find, as a scientist, that extraordinary evidence for these claims.
Krista, did you believe the people who told you their stories time after time after time?
I believe they all experienced something very profound, but I'm not entirely certain that I agree with their interpretation of their experiences, given that the experiences are so similar time after time. Many of the accounts, they all share certain things in common, and there's a whole host of stories that are available in various books. There's classics of the extraterrestrial abduction phenomenon now. There's a lot of information available, and it's very I don't think it's coincidental that people's stories mesh with the stories that are canonical.
Well,
in
then
the
what
culture.
is it if it's not coincidence?
I think it's a spiritual experience. I think people have truly profound experiences that I think a Christian ecstatic or spiritual experiences can often be traumatic as well. People feel very shaken by them, and I think there are similarities across cultures and across spiritual experiences that extraterrestrial experiences fit into.
What do you think, Rob?
I absolutely
Have they been
agree.
here?
No.
They haven't talked to you?
No, they haven't talked to me. They haven't talked to anybody, in my humble opinion. I agree with Krista completely that there is a valid psychological experience called the UFO abduction phenomenon, but I don't agree that the anecdotal evidence that comes out of it has any relation to external reality. There is no abduction by extraterrestrial beings, no anal probes, no messing with our cattle, no crop circles that aren't made by pranksters. Chris said it exactly right. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, and there just isn't that. In fact, what we end up with is the vision of incompetent aliens, that they come here, they try to keep their presence secret, but sort of kind of succeed at that, but aren't really very good at that. I would suspect if they wanted to observe us and keep it a secret, we wouldn't know at all. And if they wanted us to know about it, we would all know about it. But that Cletus and Bubba in the back 40 are the two guys who know about it, but the President of the United States or Kofi Annan doesn't know about it, doesn't seem credible to me.
You buy that?
I agree. I have no evidence myself of the visitation of beings from outer space. But leaving aside the fact, the hypothesis...
I find it very hard to do that, but go ahead.
No, well, philosophy is not about facts,
I know
it's
that.
about ideas. And the very problem of how there would be a communication with such beings, in what fashion would there be communication, is a very interesting philosophical problem. I think your idea is great, but I have to say that we should never treat visitors from outer space as authorities. If we are to retain our own intelligence, we must interrogate them. We must state our point of view. We cannot just say, oh my goodness, some guy from Andromeda told me this, that, therefore it's true.
No, I understand what you're saying, but on the other hand, suppose the aliens say, okay, Graham, we're having the big conference on the meaning of life, okay? Would you like to come?
Sure, I'll come.
Okay, and they say, okay, so here are the directions, here's how you get there.
Well,
and
I
then
hope
you
you take
say,
me.
and that's right, then you say, oh, well, I need a lift.
Right.
Immediately, as soon as you have to ask for the lift, the question of who has the better technological, scientific understanding of reality is immediately resolved.
Krista?
They do, because they can offer you the lift.
Well, in the stories, people almost always communicate with, or aliens almost always communicate with people telepathically, which overcomes some of the communication problem, not needing a common language per se, although, interestingly, most communications are pretty cryptic, at least at the start. But I also think that I'm not sure we would need a lift necessarily. There's a lot of people who are working very hard at launching a mission to Mars outside of NASA at the moment, for example.
Oh, sure, I'm a
People
member
you
of the
know?
Mars Society myself, sure.
They have a web page. I certainly know of them, and they're working towards a non-NASA mission.
Let me ask Father Chris, if they haven't visited us here yet, do you believe it's possible they're out there?
From the astronomy that I know, yes. It's, shall we say, I don't have any evidence yet to say that life in other parts of the universe is not possible. So I'm sorry, a bit of a negative. But everything, putting it positively, everything I know about the universe so far, scientifically, shows that there is a chain which produces life, except, the final big jump from molecules to life, to DNA. It's that's not clear at the moment. So I have to look for the biologists. But as far as astronomers are concerned, all the steps are there and are repeated, seem to be repeated.
Can I get a quick go around just to see if we've got agreement before we take a break and move on to the next one? Do you think there's life out there?
I'd like to think so, yes.
I don't have any desire to have it there, but I think it's probable that it is. I think it's almost inconceivable that this would be the only planet in the entire scope of the universe that had intelligent life.
I agree with Graham. The universe is so humongously big, for us to be the only little bit that's got mold on it seems unlikely to me.
All right, so it sounds like we've almost got consensus here that there are aliens. What is that going to do to religion if we discover it? We'll be back. So all you smart people think it's possible there's life out there.
Maybe likely.
It may be likely. So then the hypothetical is, could religion withstand the discovery, for sure, of aliens?
I always wonder about the for sure. Who can be sure? And that's the intrigue.
Who's questioning the for sure? Is it the father part or the scientist?
Well, in a sense, both. The for sure, you know, I'd sort of personally, I'd love to meet an alien, I think, anyway. The scientist part says, but I've got no proof yet that they actually do exist, although I say it looks as if the conditions
But
are
it's
there.
a question to ponder, and here you are, the Vatican astronomer. You'd think this is something that you'd think about.
Very definitely. And so it's something to think about and conjecture, because what it does, actually, is makes us think about ourselves. And that's what I find, you know, and certainly if one actually meets an alien, yes, it'll make us think about ourselves as well as the alien very much. And as you were doing this kind of thought experiment, if I met an alien, then what would it be? Really makes us think about ourselves.
Well, ourselves, but also what we've been taught.
Yes, so that's part of it. So it may reinforce what we've been taught and also help us to reevaluate it as well. And so that's why, you know, I love the challenge that, say, Rob produced, that, you know, this would really shatter religion.
Do you think it would?
I don't think it need to. For at least
Oh, that was convincing.
The problem is, say, religions. You know, there are, obviously, religions are made up of people who believe. And so for some people, yes, it will be really shattering, and for others, no, it'll be really confirming. So I think that we'll find the whole spectrum of people. And again, that's what I say. The fascinating thing is to see our kind of reactions. That's why I find Krista's study so interesting.
Well, in fact, some people find a new spiritual path outside of their religious path. Most people who already are on a religious path are confirmed. There are people who actually mention other people associated with the Vatican. I can't remember their names so far, but they...
John Paul? No, sorry.
No, they refer to various Vatican officials who may have made statements about extraterrestrial life and confirming their own experience. And they also talk about their mind-expanding experience. Some people have a greater psychic sense after their experiences with extraterrestrials. And even,
would they stay with conventional religion, or did it alter their belief? Are they sort of a test case of what it is we're discussing?
in the stories that I studied, most people didn't seem to be traditionally religious. They seem to be on a more independent religious path. And but nonetheless, new religious movements have arisen around the whole idea of extraterrestrial encounters, like the Raelians in Quebec, for example.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it would change religion, alter religion?
Oh, I'm
destroy
sure it would,
religion?
It would alter it, but the hypothesis that would destroy religion doesn't even seem to me to add up at all. Just going back to what Krista was saying, you know, Krista is talking about people who clearly had a religious experience, but who then gave an interpretation of it in terms of cosmic beings. But it was fundamentally a religious thing you're talking about, it seems to me. That's one example to me that religion as such is in no way at odds with our encounter with beings from outer space.
But Rob thinks
Well,
that'd be it.
yes, there's a question of the validity
We
of the
would need
religious
Father
experience. You know, Michael
Corbelli?
Persinger, well, we would need him as an astronomer. He's a very fine researcher. Whether we would need the organized religion part, I'm not sure. Michael Persinger at Laurentian University here in Ontario, who was profiled in Saturday Night magazine just recently, has this test chamber where he can do transcranial magnetic stimulation. And if he puts a devout person into his test chamber, that devout person will have an experience of encountering a religious presence. If he puts an atheist who is inclined to believe in extraterrestrial life in the test chamber, that same stimulation results in the experience of an encounter with extraterrestrial life. So very much the relationship between religion, spiritual encounters and extraterrestrial encounters, I think very clearly is hardwired in our brain as being essentially different names for the same thing.
Your case proves the exact opposite. What you've shown is that a certain physical stimulation may be interpreted by one person religiously and by another person differently, which means that the technology has nothing to do with the quality of the person's experience. That is completely independent of the technology and unverifiable by the technology.
But you know, it's like these experiences, it's like a drug experience. You can send somebody on a drug trip and have them have that experience of going somewhere and not have them ascribe any reality to that experience. What we're dealing with here is the question that certain of these experiences we do say are real experiences, religious experiences. People want to respond to them as if they have an external reality, that there is a God who is responsible for the experience.
It seems to me, though, that the question of whether it's a biochemical process or some other kind of process, a psychological process, a drug-induced process, doesn't really matter. What matters is that people are interpreting their experiences. They might just say, oh, that was a bad trip because they were on acid that day. Or they might say, wow, I met an angel, or I met an extraterrestrial and they showed me a devastated Earth. The part that interests me is that people make meaning out of their experience, and they will continue to make meaning out of their experience when they meet an extraterrestrial. I think religion may not look like it looks like now, especially for people who have very literalist kind of beliefs, but people will still do religion because part of being human is searching for meaning.
Absolutely, and I think it's part of the basic neurological wiring of our brain, but it's not necessarily having anything to do with an external religion. I mean, the fundamental question here is, there are two fundamental questions. Does God exist? And there are only two possible answers. Yes, he does. She, it does. No, he, she, it does not. Both answers are astonishing. They enormously change our place in the universe, whether we are created beings or whether we are beings who live in a universe that evolved entirely through random processes. The same is true for this question about extraterrestrials. Do aliens exist? Either yes, they do, or no, they don't. And both are astonishing answers. If they do, we are one of a vast panoply of intelligent life forms in the universe. And if they don't, we're all the universe's God. And either way, it's mind-blowing. But there is an answer to those questions. God either does or doesn't exist. Aliens either do or don't exist.
There's answers on different planes. The answer to whether an alien exists or not is on a physical plane. And sure, we may not ever have the sensitivity or the detectors or whatever to find that answer, but the answer is on that plane. The answer to whether God exists is obviously on a different plane. And it's not a matter of, you know, whether a stimulation gives you a God experience or not.
Well, the way I look at it, Chris, is here in Canada, we recently saw our big two airline carriers merge. And soon, so we have fewer planes.
Well, we'll let you finish
and ultimately,
this
we're only going to have one plane. I'm not actually convinced of the reality of multiple planes of experience.
Graham?
I know that's where we very much part ways here.
Yes, exactly. So
But I think we're going to have the one plane, ultimately.
Robert puts things in such an oversimplified way. The question, does God exist, has more than one answer, more than two answers. Maybe there's more than one God. Maybe there are many deities, and gods may exist in various levels, so that it's quite possible that there are innumerable answers.
Well, you put it, that's the standard philosophical response, which is no matter what happens in the world, I've got job security because there are no solid answers. And I would prefer to say, no, actually, there are solid answers to tough questions, and you have to be pinned down at some point.
All right, I'm going to stop you there, because we're going to take a break and come back and find out whether our interest in aliens is a sign of the failure of organized religion. Christy, you talked about the fact that the people you interviewed for your study who'd had close encounters weren't necessarily traditional religion types. They were sort of seekers. You've talked about comparable rise that you found indications in evangelism and New Age religions. What does that connection mean to you?
Wow, I think that a lot of people are searching for meaning at the moment, and they're not finding it in prescribed ways. They're wanting to seek out more and other answers than some of the mainstream religions are giving them at the moment, and they're wanting independent paths to that. They like the individual experience. You can see that in all sorts of religious movements, from evangelical Christian movements where personal experience of the Spirit of God is a common experience. And you can see it in New Age religion, where actually having trance mediums pass on information or having psychic experiences is part of it. I don't think it's necessarily a failure of religion. I think
that people are searching for something else? I
think that people are not liking the regimentation of traditional religious paths at the moment.
Do you see it that way at all? Could you interpret it that way?
I think that's probably true. I do believe that people, however, have always sought to renew their religious life outside the practices of their time. In fact, the history of the Catholic Church is full of that. The coming of different orders, the Franciscans and the like, was a dissatisfaction with the existing institutions. So I think that the religious spirit of the human being will always transcend the habits of a given practice or a given organization.
I completely agree. It's certainly not a new phenomenon. We're just having a resurgence of it at the moment.
And why would that be, and how do you interpret it?
And the very sort of common ground, of, again, human experience and maybe alien experience, that there are always the two sides of ourselves that we experience. One is the wonderful side, the creative, the intelligent side, ability to, the relational side, artistic, wonderful things, the scientific side, understanding, and then, there's the dark side, where things are black, where we can do incredible violence to each other, disregard other people, certainly if they're anywhere out of our immediate circle in which we're interested. So these two aspects, I think everyone experiences and wants to find a way to, reconcile.
And how do aliens fit into that?
Because this may be the alien experience as well.
And we've got the vocabulary now. We couldn't talk about aliens 1,000 years ago when we didn't have a model that said that there were other planets in our solar system, let alone the rocky bodies, places that people could exist. These days, we're able to interpret, I think, experiences that have been part of human psychological experience since the dawn of time in a new way, because we have a vocabulary that includes extrasolar planets, that includes DNA, that includes evolution, and a pop culture background as a science fiction writer that I contribute to, but that has been hugely informed by movies like Close Encounters and E.T. The whole world understands the alien encounter phenomenon now.
But it doesn't mean that people, either believe more in science, or that they, that it isn't enough to believe in God and what they've been taught about how this world was formed and how we were created, that you want to look outside and find something else instead, because that story's not good enough. It's not fulfilling enough. People
do believe in science a lot at the moment. In fact, in their stories of their extraterrestrial encounters, they often employ the mode of description that popular science uses. They give measurements. They describe in very minute, they'll say the alien was 7 feet tall or 4.5 feet tall. They'll say the alien seemed to have certain kinds of movements, was a certain color, he was gray in color. They're almost always male, by the way, extraterrestrials, and they always have...
Why?
I don't know, that's just what people say. And extraterrestrials are almost always described as scientists.
I could only answer that when I've met one.
When you hear those stories, you think, well, we can't reach that person. It's not a believer. I mean, can you imagine sort of a true Catholic thinking this or believing that? And if they were, then would you think, well, something's gone wrong with your teachings? We've lost you.
I'm wondering about the male. I suppose the male figure has always been there in the the religious leaders. So maybe that's our problem with aliens.
If someone came to you though and confessed that to you, would you think, oh, what does one say?
Exactly.
It is a conversation stopper at a cocktail party.
But I mean, for a religious person, is it also a sign that they're gone? They're no longer believing the same stuff that you believe?
As I say, fundamentally, maybe they are. At least they have the same
It's not either
the same
or.
fundamental questions. And I sit here, a philosopher nodding. You know, it's the same fundamental questions. You know, it's about, you know, the good part of us and the evil part of us, and how to make the, you know, how to make them work, and how to make it work not individually, but also in society as well. And you know, so these are the big questions. For some, as it were, salvation comes from outside, and so that's why you invoke an alien, and you know that's a common thing to do. But in the end, it's got to come from each individual.
If we think, you know, God made us all special, and He loves us each as we are, and then aliens are better, smarter. I mean, what does that shatter a myth? Does that destroy anything?
Being smarter doesn't mean you're better. That is certainly something we've learned in the 20th century. But if people think of the aliens, perhaps they're actually thinking of something like an angel. They perhaps mean something spiritual in the first place. And then they use the vocabulary. Robert said we have a vocabulary shaped by science for talking about our spiritual life.
What if it is just scientific, though? What if they think it really, you know,
Well,
it's not an angel, it's an alien, it's another creature. It's
then I think scientists should start trying to verify this, of course, if they're making scientific claims.
And I guess back to the topic that we're, you know, what does this then do to people of faith and what the faith is?
Well, I've said to our producer on the phone, I don't think it makes any difference to faith, because I don't think faith is the same thing as ancient pre-scientific cosmology. That is the thing that can be destroyed by scientific experiences like this are pre-scientific theories, and the Bible and Plato and the Hindu texts all have pre-scientific cosmology. That cannot withstand the scientific evidence that we now have, but faith is a spiritual activity central to the human being. The spirit is not itself under attack by these bits of evidence.
So you think Robert's wrong?
Dead wrong.
He does think
Completely
that. I know he does.
Right.
I just want to make it clear.
Well, but you mentioned, you know, what does it do to our belief that, because the fundamental question, does God care about us as individual human beings? We have an enormous ability to retain that belief in the face of the overwhelming run of ego it is to retain that, to believe that God cares about whether or not we get a raise, or whether or not our love lives go well, or whether or not
Score a touchdown.
or score a touchdown. But all those poor people starving in Ethiopia, well, you know, their agenda just wasn't quite as important to God, that they might get something to eat. We have an enormous ability to think that the universe considers us special, when in fact those of us here in Canada and North America are really just very lucky, not very special.
You don't want to weigh in on that one. You look like you're poised to say something there.
I think I have to agree.
There.
Yes, there we are, as reluctantly as.
Well,
Yes, you know, it's that, you know, we so much look at our, you know, what's immediately around us, that it's far more difficult. Thank goodness for the prophets among us, and the people who are really fired up and do try and extend our concern and our.
but the one thing, you talk about looking around us, the one thing that knowing that there are aliens, or ourselves getting out into the universe, it expands that perspective
so
enormously.
maybe thank goodness for aliens, you know.
Oh, I think so. I think anything.
If there are, I believe, you know, God will let us know at the right time.
And I believe by random chance,
and
we will
some people
discover
might
at
think
some
we're darn close to that right time now.
But certainly, if anything comes out of this, the idea that the continual expansion of our perspective, that the universe is this, you know, and in 100 years ago, we knew that there was a galaxy. We didn't know that there were multiple galaxies. The universe consists of billions of galaxies that consist of billions of stars. We have had an enormous...
You are sounding like Carl Sagan yourself.
Well, you know, poor Carl is no longer here. I'm a poor substitute, but the universe literally and figuratively expands over time. We have got a bigger universe to deal with, and trying to carve out a special place for us, a place as the purpose of creation, as the most vaunted, exalted beings in creation, becomes harder and harder when there gets to be far more around you than just you and your little valley.
So if we do find aliens, will we still need God? We'll talk about that when we come back. So if we found aliens, would we still need God?
the aliens might be God, as far as we can tell. We've always had a tendency to want to worship superior beings. Even in the last century, we saw the cargo cults that emerged in the Philippines when people started worshiping and making models of airplanes, people who had not previously seen airplanes. We have a tendency to want to look up to somebody. And I suspect there would be a religion, absolutely. Jesus Christ Superstar would be replaced with Jesus Christ Astronaut. We would very much take God, take the aliens, some segment of our society would very much take aliens to be God or God's agents in this physical universe.
Father Chris? Not you among them? Do you believe that?
I was expecting Krista to leap in. That's why I wasn't about, because she was just poised and I must hear what she's going to say. But no, is the short answer. God is not, for me, is not something, of this, universe. God made the universe, and so we're not going to discover God in the universe and by any visit from aliens.
Indeed, yes. I mean, certainly if we live in a created universe, in fact, that's the theme, of course, of my book, Calculating God, that we live in a created universe should be immediately apparent to anybody who looks with a sufficiently fine-tooth comb. If we do live in a created universe, God's fingerprint should be all over it. And if we don't, then the lack of those fingerprints should be instructive as well. That's what I explore in Calculating God. I don't dispute that our definitions of God are that God dwells without the universe, outside the universe. It's not an immanent God, it's a transcendent God. But if aliens showed up, very many of us would say that they had special relationship to God that many of us don't have.
What I'd like to know, and would be fascinated to find out, yes, about their religion, but I'd want to know about their science.
Oh, me too, yes.
and why? Because I find in science and in the knowledge, the fingerprint of God, as it's been put, and certainly, something about the Creator in that. So the more that they can tell me about science and about the universe, the more I would know.
But it wouldn't diminish your need for God.
No, just as why would it diminish one's need for the one who's responsible for it all, aliens included?
But what if they came and said, we used to believe in God, but we got over it? What if they came and said, yeah, when we were at your level of scientific understanding, but that was 10,000 years ago, or 1 million years ago, or 10 billion. Well,
yes.
not 10 billion.
Yes.
The universe is not old enough to accommodate intelligent life that's 10 billion years old. But 1 billion years ago, we had that too, and we don't anymore. What would your response be in that case?
Yes, and certainly this is something Joe Tarter, who heads the SETI,
program,
Institute,
sure.
will say.
Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Yeah.
Exactly. The sort of older is not necessarily better.
So I've heard, and more intelligent isn't necessarily wiser. I've heard that too.
Exactly.
Yes.
I'd like to bring a bit of a broader perspective to this. You've said we always wanted to worship superior beings.
So I said some of us, and I cited people in the Philippines in World War II, but not all of us. I don't have any particular desire to find something to worship.
And certainly through time, that hasn't been the case either. If you look at the Greeks, Greek gods are not terribly superior to human gods. They're very human themselves, as are many spirit beings that are part of sort of the spiritual universe of other cultures. So I think that God is a much more changeable concept than one superior God.
I agree with you. I mean, philosophically, it's one of those great concepts that whatever you define it as being, somebody else will say, well, no, that's not it either. It's one of those undefinable words. It's like, how do we define consciousness, or how do we define what makes us different from the animals? Whatever you point to no longer becomes the definition. It's not tool using, because chimps use tools.
Well, not only that, but across cultures, there are often very human like gods, that gods are not outside of our lives, they're in our lives. They're in Christianity, there's Christ who came as a person, and that's sort of the power of the story, that God was incarnated as a human being. I don't think that God necessarily needs to be outside.
Graham?
Yes, well, you've raised the question whether we might think that these beings as gods, and I agree with you that what we should be talking about are not divine visitations, that these aliens are in fact part of the universe in some way. So let's agree with that. We're not really talking about divine angels, etc. But it's just as likely, in my opinion, that this alien who came would say to Robert Sawyer, well, I've come to bring you greater insight into things. You have been neglecting your spiritual life. You have been attached to the present state of science, to certain technologies. You believe in the brain and so on. But in fact, your reality is much bigger than that, and you must develop your spiritual life. You haven't believed in God, and you should believe in God. That I consider is equally probable.
I realize that you do, and the difference is, if I was presented with an overwhelming case to change my position, I would change it. A fundamentalist presented with an overwhelming case to change his position does not change it. And I think that
what
open,
would be overwhelming evidence?
Well, I would say that the overwhelming, I mean, to me, if somebody came and said, hey, here's, the formula by which God created the universe, the question of whether God still exists and whether God created the universe are two separate questions. I mean, there may be a creator who started the whole ball rolling and is no longer around, or if he's around, no longer takes an active role. But I have more faith in people who have more knowledge and more experience than I do than you do. In that if somebody came and said, after 1 billion years of research, here is all of the evidence we found that we live in a created universe. I'm not going to be the guy who says, oh, you're wrong. I don't accept that your research is valid just because I did not do it myself. But it would take, as Chris said at the outset, for me, not just on whether or not aliens exist, but whether or not God exists. Those are both extraordinary claims that require extraordinary proof.
What do you think this whole question, though, has done in terms of science opening up and our knowledge of the universe? And to say that, as you did at the beginning, all of you thought it's possible life's out there, what does that do to our feeling of specialness, that we're not alone, what we believe?
I think it's very salutary for us to learn and to come to think that we are not special. I agree with Robert on this point. And
there's a miracle.
No,
in our religious, no, I'm just teasing.
The humanistic self-conception is something we have got to overcome, even in relation to other species that we know of, for that matter. So I think that's very good. But the idea that our religious life consists in the egoistic assertion that we are special, I think is exactly not what religion is about. It's actually seeking to recognize something that is greater than ourselves.
Chris?
Yes, I'd agree with the philosopher. I'd also add, from the religious point, there is also a sense in which there is a specialness because God, acknowledges and loves each individual. So as far as God's concerned, then it's a care for each individual. So for aliens, well, what's the matter with a few billions more, as it were, to God? Right. God's got enough people on this earth to love in a special way.
And for the billions on this earth who believe, to think, well, probably out there there's some life, that doesn't change what I believe and how I feel about my Creator. And
it won't change how God feels towards each individual on earth.
And what does it change about the way people on this earth would feel?
Perhaps they would find rejoice in a wider community, yes, and more variety, and so that sense of an even greater God than they know.
I think people understand their faith in community. I think that it's not a solo thing. I think it's a cultural thing. We talk to other people. We engage in community practices. And the extraterrestrial encounter phenomena has produced communities. And so in that way, I think, it's continued in the creation and recreation of religion. And I think that if aliens came to join us, if we weren't terrified of them right away, we'd include them in the community somehow.
Thank you. I'm going to stop you there, Krista. And when we come back, some final thoughts from Mr. Hot Seat, Robert Sawyer. So, Robert Sawyer, you say that if we found aliens, that would be devastating to religions.
As I said at the outset, to organized religions. I don't dispute any of my colleagues here that there's a spiritual dimension to human thought and human psychology. But the organized religions that have said, this is the way it is, God did this on this day of creation, or that God wants people to live in this certain way, will be assailed by the arrival of extraterrestrials who say, we don't share that view. And even with the knowledge we have now, the experiences that people have had, that they've testified to, the search and conviction on many people's parts that there probably is life out there, do you think it's just a question of until and when? Oh, absolutely. The most likely way. So you can believe, but just,
Wait a minute.
Wait a minute. I mean, the most likely way for us to communicate with aliens is not by physical contact, but by radio broadcasting. We've been broadcasting as a species since 1895, when Marconi invented radio. We've been broadcasting television in this country. The CBC is celebrating its 50th anniversary. We've been very short period of time on the stage as players who can A, transmit, and B, receive radio signals. We're in a universe that's 11, 12, depending on who you ask, billion years old. Very much we've just scratched the surface of seeing if there's anybody out there.
So your belief is it's probably just a matter of time, and when that happens?
Well, belief is, of course, our key word tonight,
Yes,
isn't
it
it?
would be.
I am predisposed.
What's your faith?
Yes,
We're testing your
that's
faith.
right. I have no reason to believe that this planet is special out of all that must exist in this vast universe. Given that, the preponderance of my belief system is that there must be other intelligent beings out there.
Do you also believe that there must be a God, that there was a creator of this universe?
Well,
you write about it.
I write about it in Calculating God. I'm very interested in it. I think we have very good evidence that there might in fact have been an intelligent designer for the universe. We also have very good counter-arguments about why that is not the case. And there's not time to go into it, so people should just buy my book, Calculating God, to see the debate at some considerable length. But we can't answer that question yet. But I don't think the question is beyond our capabilities. And our scientific understanding is progressing at leaps and bounds. I suspect
we might
that
prove
in
that
this
before
century,
an alien comes?
I suspect within this century we will know the answer to a preponderance of evidence, a good courtroom sort of evidence, that whether or not God exists and whether or not aliens exist.
Robert Sawyer, thank you very much for participating, and also Graham Nicholson, Krista Henriksen, and Father Chris Corpely. Thank you both so much.
Valerie Pringle's wardrobe is courtesy of Holt Renfrew. Studio furniture provided by Hargal Office Furniture Limited.